Extensive fraud investigations in Minnesota reveal major oversight breakdowns across multiple public programs. Minnesota is the focus of multiple federal and state investigations, following the exposure of several large-scale fraud schemes that authorities say resulted in the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars in public funds. The cases span pandemic-era nutrition programs, Medicaid-funded housing assistance, and autism treatment services, raising serious questions about how such significant misuse of taxpayer money went undetected for years. The unfolding investigations have prompted criminal prosecutions, congressional scrutiny, and internal reviews of state agencies responsible for administering public benefits. Officials are examining whether warning signs were ignored, whether internal safeguards failed, and whether political and administrative decisions contributed to prolonged vulnerabilities in oversight systems. While several defendants charged in these cases have connections to Minnesota's Somali community, law enforcement officials and community leaders alike have emphasized that the alleged crimes involve specific individuals and organizations, not the broader population. Nevertheless, the scale of the fraud and its intersection with previous concerns involving public safety and national security have heightened public attention. Federal, state, and congressional scrutiny expands. The magnitude of the alleged fraud has triggered responses from multiple layers of government. The U.S. Department of Justice has filed criminal charges in federal court, while the U.S. Treasury Department has launched its own inquiries into the handling of pandemic-related relief funds. Members of Congress have also initiated investigations to determine how federal dollars were distributed and whether oversight failures occurred at the state level. Minnesota lawmakers are conducting hearings and audits focused on agencies such as the Department of Human Services and the Department of Education. These efforts include reviewing internal communications, whistleblower reports, and financial controls to assess how fraudulent claims were processed and approved. The administration of Governor Tim Walz, who assumed office in 2019, has faced increasing scrutiny as details of the schemes have emerged. Critics argue that state agencies failed to act decisively when red flags became apparent. Administration officials, meanwhile, point to the unprecedented scale of pandemic relief programs and say reforms are now underway to strengthen oversight. Pattern of fraud across multiple programs. Prosecutors describe the fraud cases as interconnected examples of systemic weaknesses rather than isolated incidents. According to court documents, the schemes relied on falsified records, inflated claims, fabricated services, and the rapid creation of shell organizations to access public funds. The most significant cases involve a pandemic child nutrition program administered through nonprofit sponsors, Medicaid-funded housing stabilization services, state autism treatment programs reimbursed through Medicaid. In each instance, investigators allege that defendants submitted claims for services that were never provided or were exaggerated far beyond reality. Pandemic Child Nutrition Program and Feeding Our Future. The largest investigation centers on Feeding Our Future, a Minnesota-based nonprofit that served as a sponsor for meal distribution sites during the COVID-19 pandemic. When schools closed in 2020, federal child nutrition programs were expanded to ensure continued access to meals for children nationwide. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, Feeding Our Future and affiliated individuals submitted fraudulent claims stating that millions of meals were prepared and distributed to children across the state. Prosecutors allege that these claims were largely fictitious and resulted in nearly $250 million in federal reimbursements. Federal juries have convicted Feeding Our Future founder Amy Bach and restaurant owner Salim Saeed for their roles in orchestrating the scheme. Authorities say the funds were diverted to personal expenses, including luxury homes, high-end vehicles, and real estate purchases both in the United States and abroad. Investigators determined that claimed meal counts vastly exceeded what could reasonably be produced or distributed based on staffing, kitchen capacity, and population data. Prosecutors have characterized the case as one of the most significant pandemic relief fraud schemes ever prosecuted in the United States. Legal challenges and continuation of payments. In 2021, the Minnesota Department of Education attempted to suspend reimbursements to Feeding Our Future after identifying discrepancies in documentation and reported meal numbers. The nonprofit responded by filing a lawsuit alleging racial discrimination. A state court judge ordered the department to resume payments while the legal dispute was resolved. Federal prosecutors later stated that this decision allowed the alleged fraud to continue and grow. During the investigation, authorities uncovered additional criminal conduct. Several individuals were charged with attempting to bribe a juror by offering cash and drafting written arguments aimed at influencing the verdict. Prosecutors also alleged witness intimidation, including threats made to discourage individuals from reporting the fraud. Political activity and campaign donations. The Feeding Our Future case also raised questions about political donations made by individuals later charged in the scheme. State Senator Omar Fetteh, a Somali-American legislator, attended a community event celebrating the court ruling that restored funding to the nonprofit. Fetteh later acknowledged receiving campaign contributions from individuals who were subsequently indicted. He stated that the funds were returned once the allegations became public. Prosecutors have not accused him or other elected officials of criminal wrongdoing related to the fraud. Housing Stabilization Services fraud. Another major investigation involves Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services program, which provides Medicaid-funded assistance to individuals seeking stable housing.
The program covers services such as housing navigation, tenancy support, and coordination with landlords. Federal prosecutors allege that the program was exploited through false billing and fabricated services. Defendants are accused of submitting claims for assistance that was never provided or grossly overstated. Former acting U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson described the activity as layered and complex, stating that these schemes drained tens of millions of dollars from Medicaid. In September, Thompson announced charges against 8 individuals accused of defrauding the program of approximately $8.4 million. He indicated that the case represents only the initial phase of prosecutions, suggesting additional charges may follow. Prosecutors allege that funds were used to finance luxury lifestyles, including expensive vehicles and property purchases in Minnesota and abroad, especially in Kenya. Unexpected growth and oversight gaps. The Housing Stabilization Services program experienced rapid and dramatic growth. Initially projected to cost roughly $2.6 million per year, the program paid out more than $100 million in a single year. Federal officials noted that such expansion typically triggers enhanced oversight mechanisms. Lawmakers have since questioned how claims were approved without verifying whether services were actually delivered.
While investigating the Feeding Our Future case, federal agents uncovered a separate fraud involving Minnesota's autism treatment program. Prosecutors allege that Asha Farhan Hassan submitted fraudulent Medicaid claims for autism therapy services. According to court records, Hassan allegedly billed the state approximately $14 million for services that were either never provided or delivered by unqualified personnel. Authorities say she paid parents monthly sums to keep their children enrolled in the program, regardless of whether legitimate therapy occurred. Prosecutors also allege that significant sums were transferred overseas, including funds used to purchase real estate in Kenya. The autism treatment program saw a sharp increase in spending over a relatively short period. Federal officials reported that the program's budget grew from approximately $3 million in 2018 to nearly $400 million in 2023. Dr. Mehmet Oz, administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, cited the figures while raising concerns about how such rapid expansion occurred without adequate safeguards. Investigators are examining provider certification processes and billing approvals. Several reports cite whistleblower accounts from within Minnesota's Department of Human Services. According to those accounts, employees who raised concerns about suspicious billing patterns were ignored, reassigned, or marginalized. State Senate Jordan Rasmussen, the lead Republican on the Senate Human Services Committee, said the alleged sidelining of whistleblowers allowed fraud to persist. He argued that long-standing administrative dysfunction contributed to an environment where misuse of public funds could continue unchecked. Republican lawmakers have criticized Governor Walz's administration, arguing that state agencies failed to respond to obvious warning signs. Rasmussen cited examples where organizations claimed to serve thousands of individuals daily in communities with far smaller populations. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer has also criticized the governor, stating that basic financial controls were not enforced, even as expenditures increased dramatically. Governor Walz has acknowledged failures in oversight and said his administration is implementing reforms, including tighter auditing requirements and increased cooperation with federal investigators. Some reporting has suggested that portions of the fraud proceeds were transferred overseas through informal money transfer systems, commonly referred to as Hawala networks. A City Journal article claimed that some funds may have reached Al-Shabaab, a U.S.-designated terrorist organization based in Somalia. Federal prosecutors have not publicly confirmed that any of the stolen funds directly supported terrorist groups. However, the allegations have prompted additional scrutiny from federal authorities. Rasmussen said the volume of overseas transfers raises legitimate concerns and warrants further investigation. Minnesota has previously been linked to terrorism-related prosecutions involving Somali American defendants. In the late 2000s, approximately 20 young men from Minnesota traveled to Somalia to join Al-Shabaab. One of them, Shirwa Ahmed, carried out a suicide bombing in 2008. Former Hennepin County Sheriff Rich Stanek testified before Congress during that period, warning of radicalization risks. He said that while such cases have become less frequent, they have not disappeared entirely. In 2023, Abdisattar Ahmed Hassan pleaded guilty to attempting to provide material support to ISIS after attempting to travel abroad. In addition to fraud investigations, several violent crime cases involving Somali-linked defendants have drawn public attention in Minnesota. One case involved Abdimahat Billy Mohammedis, a Somali national with prior sex offense convictions who was charged with kidnapping and sexual assault while on probation. Another case involved Colleen Lay Ibrahim Deary, who received a 12-year prison sentence for sexually assaulting a minor. The case generated controversy after a mosque submitted a letter seeking leniency. During the summer, multiple shootings occurred in the Twin Cities area, including a fatal mall shooting involving a teenager and separate incidents at high school graduation events. Law enforcement officials described some incidents as gang-related. In May, Michael Lual-Neal was charged with second-degree intentional murder in the death of David Chant, who was found beaten to death in a park in Burnsville. Law enforcement analysis of crime trends. Stanek said most violent crime linked to Somali American suspects involves a limited number of repeat offenders rather than organized criminal networks. He described loosely connected groups rather than structured gangs. Minnesota does not collect crime data by ethnicity, and statewide violent crime has declined overall. However, high-profile cases have increased public visibility and concern. Community leaders reject broad generalizations. Leaders within Minnesota's Somali community have rejected attempts to associate criminal behavior with the community as a whole. Jalen Hussein, executive director of CARE Minnesota, emphasized that crime is an individual act and should not be attributed to an entire group. Hussein drew comparisons to earlier periods in U.S. history when Irish and Italian immigrant communities were broadly associated with criminal activity. He said many Somali Americans are law-abiding residents who contribute positively to Minnesota. Ongoing reforms and future developments. State lawmakers are considering legislative changes aimed at improving oversight, enhancing data verification, and strengthening whistleblower protections. Federal prosecutions remain ongoing, and additional indictments are expected. Governor Walz has stated that restoring public confidence will require transparency and accountability. As investigations continue, officials are focused on identifying how safeguards failed and ensuring that similar abuses do not recur.